Netflix's later daters, Anise and George's unforgettable love lessons, the predate setting the stage. Anise, a 63-year-old powerhouse with a PhD and a history as layered as her personality, isn't your average woman stepping back into the dating scene. She's sharp, accomplished, and well aware of the stakes. But beneath the polished surface lies a heart still grappling with old wounds and unspoken fears. Her journey begins not at the dinner table with George, but in the quiet moments before the date. Sitting with her daughter and a coach, she lays bare her hopes and uncertainties. "I've been told I self-sabotage my relationships," she says, almost dismissively. But that line, that's the crack in the armor. When people tell you something about yourself, chances are you already know it's true. Anise doesn't fully own this yet. Her fear, her control, her tendency to judge before connecting. Her coach encourages her to lean into her authenticity, but the advice feels shallow. Shine in your biggest way, they say, but how can you shine when you're terrified to be vulnerable? Her daughter is her confidant, her mirror, and her emotional crutch. She seeks her approval constantly, as if afraid to trust her own instincts. In these moments, we see Anise not as the accomplished woman she projects, but as someone haunted by the shadow of her past. And that shadow, it's her first husband, the love of her life, the man who saw her potential before she ever earned her doctorate, who planted the seeds of dreams they never got to see grow together. When he died, tragically, unexpectedly, she buried not just him but a part of herself. Now here she is, decades later, trying to build something new while holding on to the fear that it will crumble again. The date. Sparks, stumbles, and silent judgments. Enter George. 60 years old, dark-skinned, silver-haired, and a little shorter than she expected, George seems charming enough at first glance. He brings flowers, predictable, uninspired flowers. They're the kind of bouquet you grab on the way to the date, not the kind you bring when you've thought about the woman you're meeting. Still, Anise accepts them graciously, though the gesture feels hollow. The conversation begins light, but quickly veers into dangerous territory. George shares that he has one child. As far as I know, he jokes. Anise stiffens. "Is that the only one?" she presses. "Yes," he replies, only to follow with, "Are your 3 kids, all by the same father?" It's a question, just a question. But it lands like a slap. Anise bristles. The comment feels invasive, judgmental. She immediately categorizes it as awful. But why does it sting so much? Because it touches a nerve. It scratches at the surface of a story she doesn't want to tell, a life of marriages that didn't last, of plans that fell apart. The conversation moves on, but the tension lingers. George, for all his charm, continues to stumble. He asks if she's had any work done, a question that feels both inappropriate and unnecessary. He drops casual expletives, describing how he fucks around in Atlanta, a phrase that immediately shifts the dynamic from potentially romantic to unapologetically crude. And then the tipping point. "I like my women a little ghetto," George says. Anise freezes. She's dressed elegantly. Heels, a fitted black dress, a touch of cleavage. She's poised, confident, and every bit the accomplished woman she wants to be seen as. And yet, in George's words, she hears everything she's worked her whole life to avoid. Ghetto feels like an attack on her identity, a reduction of her worth to something crude and unrefined. For George, it's likely just a clumsy compliment. For Anise, it's the final straw. She excuses herself to the restroom, but she's not coming back. Not really. The post-date, Anise walks away. When Anise returns to the table, she's already mentally checked out. She tells George her Uber is outside, sidestepping the confrontation entirely. George, still unaware of how far he's pushed, tries to salvage the evening. "The night is still young," he says, but for Anise it's over. "I don't have time for what he was giving me," she reflects later. Her tone is dismissive, final. She's moved on, or at least that's what she tells herself. But is she really over it, or is she running again? The bigger picture, Anise, George, and the holy grail of relationships. Anise and George's date isn't just about 2 people failing to connect. It's a reflection of deeper truths about dating, relationships, and the stories we tell ourselves. Anise walks into every date with her accomplishments like armor. Her PhD, her independence, her fitness, they're all shields she uses to protect herself from vulnerability. But that armor also isolates her. It keeps her from truly engaging, from being seen for who she is beyond the degrees and the achievements. George, on the other hand, walks into the date raw and unfiltered. His charm is offset by his lack of tact, his inability to read the room. He wants connection, but doesn't know how to meet Anise on her level. The real tragedy of this date is that it wasn't doomed by incompatibility. It was doomed by fear. Anise's fear of being vulnerable, George's fear of being rejected. Both of them clinging to their masks instead of showing their true selves. The Michelle Obama effect. Anise, in many ways, embodies what so many in the black community admire about Michelle Obama. She's polished, accomplished, and strong. But that comparison also reveals the unattainable ideal so many are chasing, a perfect relationship that feels like a partnership of equals, like Barack and Michelle. But here's the truth. Even Michelle Obama had to work through her doubts, fears, and insecurities. Relationships aren't about perfection. They're about growth. They're about showing up authentically, even when it's uncomfortable. Final reflection. Lessons from the masterclass. Anise and George's date is a masterclass in the complexities of modern relationships. Armor keeps you safe, but also alone. Anise's accomplishments are impressive, but they won't shield her from the vulnerability love requires. Words matter, but so does intent. George's comments were clumsy, but they weren't malicious. Miscommunication stemmed from mismatched expectations, not ill will. Vulnerability is the missing piece. Both Anise and George need to drop their defenses and engage with curiosity rather than judgment. At the end of the day, this date wasn't a failure. It was a lesson. For Anise, for George, and for anyone watching. Because the truth is, we're all just trying to navigate the messiness of love, one awkward conversation at a time. The question is, are we brave enough to keep trying?